The reality is so many cases have a problem with non-disclosure, not necessarily full non-disclosure, but there's always a bit missing.
I asked them, okay, how much have you got? What are we playing with here? It is like baking a cake and we've got the ingredients. And she said, well, this is all of our assets. And I'm saying, okay, but how much of that is going to be yours?
Have confidence in yourself. You, especially if you've been in a controlling relationship, you may feel that you don't have the confidence, the skills, the knowledge. You don't need to be a lawyer to do this for yourself. You just need to have a little bit of belief in yourself, and you might have to borrow that from somebody until you really develop it for yourself.
Hi, and welcome to Accelerating Your Wealth with your host, myself, Rebecca Robertson. I'm an independent financial advisor and wealth coach. I'm the director of Evolution Financial Planning, who is also our sponsor for today's show. Well, welcome to the first face-to-face studio shot recording of Accelerating Your Wealth podcast. And welcome, Ellie.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Welcome to the first one. Isn't it lovely?
It's gorgeous.
Doesn't it feel different to Zoom?
It does. The last one we did, although it was lovely and it was a great conversation, it's really nice to be in person.
Yeah, I gave you a hug.
Yeah.
Someone made you a cup of tea.
Perfect.
It's amazing. And I feel like we can then have a deeper conversation. And that's why I'm all about authentic and making things really real, and that we can have real conversations about real things. And we've got to be quite careful in this subject, which today we're discussing why family court can feel stacked against women. And as this is something you do in your day-to-day life and you deal with all the time, men and women, and myself, but primarily with women, we can get quite passionate about this subject. So it'd be interesting to see that we don't, we keep me in check, Ellie, and I'll do the same for you,
Yeah.
that we don't go off on one too much.
Yeah.
But let me introduce Ellie a little bit. So I call it my professional name, so everyone knows me personally as Becky, but obviously I'm Rebecca Robertson, and you're Ellie, but Elaine Foster.
Yes.
And you're a family lawyer, and you run a business called McKenzie Law, and you're a family lawyer. Is that correct? Have I got that right?
Almost. So I am a consultant with McKenzie Law. So that's not my business, but I'm a consultant there. I've been there for probably about 8 years.
Okay.
I'm one of the directors there. But my own business is the Divorce Without Lawyers separate membership.
Membership,
yeah.
Which
so
I love.
I am a practicing lawyer, but it's not my own firm as such. Yeah.
Got it. Mm-hmm. And that's quite typical for a lot of lawyers, really. It's a bit like with financial advisors and financial services. You often work under another umbrella in some sort of capacity.
Yeah, it's becoming really popular now. The last probably maybe even 10 years, it's becoming a really big thing now. Yeah.
So your main sort of passion and drive really is in divorce without lawyers, but you're a lawyer, so can you just explain to people what that means?
Yeah, because it makes no sense, does it? Divorce without lawyers with a lawyer. What it comes from is, having worked in family law since 1997, I'm painfully aware of how expensive it is. And I completely understand why. You'll understand why. The cost of running a business, the insurances, staff, rents, everything else that you have to pay. So I understand why it's expensive to be a lawyer. But it always sat and jarred uncomfortably with me because a lot of people don't have that sort of money. So I set up Divorce Without Lawyers to give an option. So for people who can't afford or don't need a full-time lawyer, because a lot of the time you don't need me to fill in paperwork and forms for you, what I have created is a membership that helps people to save their money by doing a lot of the work themselves, but doing it under sort of almost supervision, not quite. It's not a one-to-one thing, but they've got, training materials. They can come on live on a call with me on a Monday night and ask any questions, how to do things, that sort of thing, which means that they keep more of their own money in their pocket to take legal advice when they need it. So that's the thing. That's why it's called Without Lawyers, even though I'm there. I'm not acting for them, I'm just supporting them.
Got it. And what happened for you to what motivated you to start doing it in that way? Why not just carry on in the law firm?
I think it was a number of things. One of them was my own experience. When I was getting divorced, it was way before the age of Facebook groups and the like. So I was aware that there was very little support out there unless you could afford to pay for it, which I couldn't. Now, I was very lucky that I worked in a law firm. I wasn't a qualified lawyer then, but I did work in a law firm. So I did have access to some fantastic legal minds and brains that I didn't have to pay for on a day-to-day basis. And I feel very, very lucky that I had that. I then went on and qualified myself, but it always sat in the back of my heart that what would I have done if I didn't have that that fortunate position of having a divorce lawyer there that I could just go, what does this mean? And how do I do that? And why is he saying this about me? And why is his lawyer saying that? It's all the questions that everybody has. But every time I'd picked up a phone, it would have cost me money.
Yeah.
So my experience was, what would I have done? And the answer is, I truly don't know. So I decided, when, this is probably about 10 years ago, I had left my law practice by then. I worked in London as a kind of regular employed lawyer back then. I'd left that firm and I wanted to do things differently. So I was going to set up my own law firm. Instead, I approached my friend Rachel McIntyre, who owns McIntyre Law in Milton Keynes, and I asked her to help me set up a law firm so I could do things differently without billing targets, without all these things. And Rachel has been amazing, actually, because she just said, well, I know you, Ellie, you're going to hate running a firm. You will not want to do it. You won't want all the bits that go alongside it. So she said, why don't you just come and do the family law at my firm? And fortunately, she has no kind of, I don't know what the word is, she doesn't have any problem with me running Divorce Without Lawyers, completely separate to, it's not part of McIntyre Law. And I'm always very careful to say that, because it's not covered by the McIntyre Law insurance or anything.
It's
I have to be, it wouldn't be fair on Rachel for me to bring that liability to the firm.
No.
So it's two separate things, but she has no problem with it. And it means that the clients have the best of all worlds, because they can save money because they don't need to pay me to do everything. When they do need an hour here and there, they can come to me for one-to-one work under the McIntyre Law umbrella. But not only that, as an all-service law firm, we can also offer them help if they need help with their wills or with an employment issue. If it's a family business, for example, Rachel can step in and help. We've got property help there. So that's where it started and how it's developed. I didn't expect it to develop this way. I didn't expect it to go quite, I thought I was just going to be kind of a free Facebook group that helped people out, but we've realised that there's so much more that we can do. So that's
the membership is thriving, like it's doing well.
Yeah, it's doing really well.
Excellent. How many members have you got at the moment?
There's probably only about 100. When I first started, I always said I wanted to keep it probably to about the 50 to 100 mark, because I felt that was the maximum that I could keep a personal eye on.
Yeah.
But then, of course, as the membership has grown, I've taken on some team members to help me, so that's great. But not only that, I've realised that as the library of materials have grown and I've really kind of developed what's in the membership portal, I don't need to have these one-to-one, because it's not a one-to-one membership.
No.
So actually, over the years, I've realised that there is so much scope for this. And so we've recently opened it up to other things as well, whereas in the beginning, we just did divorce and finance. I think a year or two ago, we brought in children matters. So we now help people with child arrangement orders and things like that, and all the issues surrounding children. And then in the last few weeks, we've also now brought in domestic abuse and economic abuse and things like that as well, which I know is something that is very close to your heart. So
yes, unfortunately, I hear too much of it, and we can definitely talk a little bit more about that in a second. But in this work that you do now, what matters to you most? Where do you see the most impact that you have in the work that you do?
I would say the biggest thing that gives me the pleasure is when people come in, and we have it every week. We get posts like this where someone comes in and says, I did it myself, and I feel so empowered by that. I have done it. I've saved £20,000. You know, my husband or my wife had spent 25, 30, 40,000 pounds on their legal fees. I've done it all myself and just had a few pay-as-you-go meetings here and there. I find that really heartwarming, because that sort of £20,000, instead of it coming into my bank account or McIntyre Law bank account or any other law firm's bank account, it's sitting in that member's bank account for their use and for the use for their children and for their financial future. And I love that. And I know a lot of people will say to me, but why would you want to help people? Why don't you want to earn the money yourself? But I can still earn a decent enough salary by helping people with the legal stuff without having to charge them for all the admin stuff that's not really worth my hourly rate. Yeah. So that's what really gives me the pleasure, is people saying that. And sometimes people don't want to do the whole thing themselves. They want to dip in and out. And that works as well. So that's what I like, the empowerment for people, the knowledge they can do it themselves.
So you know the system really well. And obviously you've seen, if you like, a bit of a error in the system in itself, because what's the conventional old school way of working as a lawyer, I'm not saying it doesn't work, but like you say, there's a lot of admin involved. There's things that can be done themselves, and it's a very complicated system in itself, especially when, like you mentioned, there might be children or there might be a business. And it's a really long process, especially when you've got to go have barristers involved and potentially go to court. So I'm not saying the whole legal system's broken, but it's not as smooth as it should be, right? What's your sort of your viewpoint on that? Like, how? I mean, I know obviously you're a lawyer and you probably you love law. You wouldn't be doing what you're doing if you didn't. But for me, who sits outside of that, and I'm sure there's other things in financial services I feel are the same with my industry, as I probably would myself. But someone looking in at that as a system and a process, to me it feels like there's very much lacking in common sense.
Yeah.
Like you're having to jump through lots of hoops, and that's just the way it is. And there's people manipulating the system, and there's people dragging out the system. There's people making their finances look not appealing as they actually are. I've seen financial pension reports, which I think sometimes are misleading, where they've made one person's pension more desirable than another. There's numerous examples I could give. What's your take on that and the system itself?
Where you said at the beginning, I love law and that's why I'm in it. I do, but it's actually fairness and justice that means more to me. I know the law is there for a reason. We have to follow the law, but I do think that the system is very broken. I think that, and I don't blame the judges for this. I don't blame the solicitors for this. I don't even blame the clients for this. I don't blame anybody in particular. But there isn't enough funding for people to get help. Now, if you're going through your first divorce, and perhaps none of your friends or family have been divorced, and even if they have, copying their examples is not always the right thing either, because every case is different. But if you don't know what to do, how do you know what applications to make? So half of the court's time, I'm making up the half, a lot of the court's time, will be spent on dealing with applications that have been made incorrectly, prematurely, completely the wrong application altogether. And that blocks up the system. So in the courts having to try and deal with litigants in person, for example, who don't know what they should be doing, they then not only have the whole system kind of slowing down because they haven't got time to hear it, but they haven't got enough judges to hear the cases that should be being heard. And a large part of this is when all the legal funding was taken away. And I can't remember what year it was now, but it's a good 10 years ago, probably more, when legal aid was really kind of buckled down on. I think that's really caused a massive problem, because now where do you go for help? I suppose in the beginning you were going to your friends, maybe your cousin or your next door neighbour or someone down the pub who, oh yeah, well my auntie got divorced 10 years ago and this is the right answer, and people are following that, and that's not good law. And every case is very different. So whoever is advising you needs to really understand the nuances. And of course, because of the lack of funding available, people either have to do it themselves, they've got to jump onto Google, which is unreliable. I mean, it's perfectly fine if you know the source that you're using is accurate, but how do you know? You're not going to know that. People nowadays are jumping onto ChatGPT and they're coming to me with documents and I've drafted my own consent order. Here it is. Look, can you just run your eye over it? I'm like, this is a disaster, but it looks professional. So people think because it looks fancy that it's right, and it isn't. And this, of course, has also created the problem where there's a massive rise in McKenzie Friends, divorce coaches, people who are not qualified to give legal advice, who are going on and doing so. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not saying that all McKenzie Friends are bad, all divorce lawyers are good. I'm certainly not saying that. But I think the important thing is knowing where to get help. And there is no clear signposting coming from anywhere, not coming from the courts or anywhere else. So I think that is the worst part of the system for me, is what do you do if you haven't got the money to get legal advice? That's the biggest problem. There's no one reliable source that you can go to. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people out there capitalising on that lack of available funding.
Who are those people?
So I would say, and again, I'm really careful not to say all McKenzie Friends are bad. I've got one lady in particular that I refer work to her, she refers work to me, she's fantastic. So I'm not saying all McKenzie Friends are bad, but what is concerning me is the rise of people who take it upon themselves to perhaps do 6-week course and call themselves McKenzie Friends, or even worse, no course at all. Because a McKenzie Friend is anyone can go into court. Anybody. You could go in tomorrow.
What's a McKenzie Friend? I've never heard of the term.
Oh, right. Okay, sorry. A McKenzie Friend is somebody who is there to support clients through their legal process.
Okay.
It came from a case years ago where there was a couple going into court. One had legal representation, the other didn't, and asked, therefore, to bring a friend in with them. And the case was a Mr. and Mrs. McKenzie, and the judge had said no, and it was, is that fair that this person had to do it on their own because they didn't have the money for a lawyer, and so on. So it has developed from there. It means that if you're going into court, you can take somebody in with you. You have to ask the judge's permission and fill in a form and everything else, but you can take someone into court. Initially, it was a friend. It was someone there to help you take notes, keep you focused, remind you when things need to be said. Don't forget to ask this. Keep notes of everything so that when you're cross-examining, you can see what was said, pass you the tissues when you're crying, all the supportive bits. And I think that there is a massive need for that. So I'm a fan of that. Where the problem has come is where it has now become quite a lucrative business. And you have McKenzie Friends charging £100, £120 an hour and basically saying, I'll help you in your divorce. I'll do your divorce for you. Now, a good McKenzie Friend won't try to give legal advice, but there are a lot out there that don't tell you they can't give legal advice, that there's not enough information. So that's my worry. And I am making it sound like I'm just slagging off McKenzie Friends.
No.
And it absolutely isn't. No. But I don't think there's enough regulation and insurance around that particular area.
I have the same issue, but in financial services, where you have someone called a financial planner, and actually that's not a regulatory term. So they might have a financial qualification, but they're not actually regulated or to give regulated financial advice, because financial advice is a regulated term. And we've made it really complicated, same as the law industry. The industry's made it terribly complicated. So why would a client understand the difference in that? And then you have somebody who's maybe not had any regulated background, they haven't got actually any qualifications, but they call themselves a financial planner. And they can do that. Yep. It's same as you have people online sort of giving, whether it's AI or it's a actual physical person talking to a camera, giving advice, and he's talking about, tracker funds and all the rest of it. And they're not actually regulated people. And it's, like you mentioned, it's really bespoke, it's personal. You can't just sort of do that one rule for everybody. Yeah. So it doesn't mean that they don't have a place. But like you say, I think sometimes some of them are overstepping the mark. Yeah,
that's the problem, because I think your perfect divorce, if there's any such thing as a perfect divorce, is where you have a legal team. Mm-hmm. And that legal team may well involve a solicitor or a legal executive. It may involve somebody who is giving you legal advice. You may also have a McKenzie Friend that helps you by going into court, helps you prepare some of your papers and your forms maybe. You have perhaps a divorce coach to help you with the emotional side of things. You might have a direct access barrister that goes into court with you. Your perfect legal team might be a bit of all of this. But the problem comes, just as a way of an example, I was on holiday a couple of weeks ago on a cruise, and a lady was sitting next to us at the table, and she kind of interrupted in the conversation that four of us were having. And she kept saying, I work in family courts. And she was a nice lady, and I work in family courts. I work in family. And she said it a few times, waiting for somebody to say, what do you do then? I thought, okay, I'll be that person. So I said, so what do you do in the family courts? And she literally, not a word of a lie, she said, well, I'm a McKenzie Friend. And McKenzie Friends are 90% cheaper than solicitors. And that was her opening line. And I'm just, yeah, but you're also probably 90% less qualified. Yeah. So, and probably 90% less regulated and probably 90% less insured. Yeah. So the comparison, it's not the same thing. A McKenzie Friend and a divorce lawyer, a qualified practicing lawyer, is not the same thing.
No.
And I think if you're going to use a McKenzie Friend, just do your due diligence. There are so many retired solicitors and judges out there that do McKenzie Friends. Perfect. Yeah. I would love everybody to be like that.
They've got the background, they've got the history. Yeah. They've got the experience at the end of the day. Yeah. They know the context of what's really going to happen and following the process. And once you've got that level of experience, it gives you a greater understanding.
Exactly. And even if they don't have the understanding of the law, in that case, don't let them give you any advice on the papers. They can sit with you in court and they can support you and make sure that, you've worked on the papers together and they know the questions you want to ask, because we all know we can walk into a situation and your mind just goes blank. This person can help you. So I am not saying don't use them. I'm just saying, please make sure you know what you're using.
You've got your full board of people, not just, you've got the right people doing the right job.
Yeah, because you don't want to be paying me to fill in a basic divorce application.
No.
That would be a complete waste of your money.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of solicitors that will take the money for that.
Yeah.
If someone wants to pay them. If someone comes to me and asks me to do a divorce, I've actually, since the law changed in 2022, was it? Since that new law came in and it's no fault divorce, I think I've only done 3 divorces now. I just don't do them now, because if a client asks me to, I say, well, I will, but you really want me to? You can fill in this piece of paper the same, or online, the same as I can. So why would you pay me?
So for layman terms, people that are listening, just explain that divorce process legally, what you've just described.
Okay, so there are a number of different aspects to getting divorced. The legal ending of the marriage is the divorce application itself. And that's the bit that the government has now really streamlined, put it online, and it is so straightforward that unless you've got some complicating factor, perhaps if, for example, there's another jurisdiction involved, you might then want to take legal advice. But 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, you will find that you can do your own divorce online, and it's an online application. One of you's the applicant, the other one will be the respondent, or you can do it jointly if you prefer now, which you never used to be able to do. There's no more allegations of adultery, behaviour, there's none of that, desertion, 2-year separation, all gone. It's now just a case of one of you says that the marriage is over, and then the other one either agrees or don't. And if they don't agree, well, frankly, it's too bad, because you can have a divorce now anyway. You don't need the other person's consent, as long as you've been married more than a year. And as I say, there's no jurisdictional issues and that kind of thing. So once you've got that, the problem comes, because that's really easy to manage yourself. You don't need a lawyer for that. Almost never would you need a lawyer for that bit. The problem comes is that it's a little bit misleading, in that a lot of the time people think that also ends the financial claims, but it doesn't. And the financial, that's a massive piece of work. You have to know what you're doing with the finances. But that's why I say to people, take a short session with a lawyer at the beginning so you understand the parameters of your case, then do as much of it as you can yourself and dip in and out with legal advice when you need it. You don't want to be paying someone like me just for basic form filling for you.
So once that form's been submitted, what then happens?
In the divorce itself. So the divorce application goes in, whether you do it yourself or jointly is slightly different processes, but I'll keep it simple by just saying you're doing it on your own for the moment. You'll submit it to the court. It will be sent to your soon-to-be ex-husband or wife. They will acknowledge the receipt of the proceedings and say, yes, that they've got the proceedings and so on. It then gets sent back to the court, and then you have to wait 20 weeks as a cooling off period. And then after that 20 weeks is up, you can apply for a conditional order. Now, the good thing is the court will tell you all the way along what steps you're up to and where it's all an online portal. So they'll keep you informed what you need to do. Your conditional order is kind of a part-way order, if you like, that it's the same as the old decree nisi used to be. That's gone now. Decree nisi, decree absolute is gone. So the conditional order is what they now would previously have called the decree nisi. And it says that the court have looked at the papers, certified you're entitled to a divorce, and then you have to then wait another 6 weeks before you can apply for your final order, which ends the marriage. And during that 6 weeks, that's the time that most people try to get their financial papers, if they've got an agreement, into the court during that period of time. So once you've got your conditional order, send in any financial agreement, and then you can apply for your final order at the end of that. Now, that's a very, very simplified process. Obviously, the bit that causes all the hiccups and the problems is sorting the finance, because, you know, if you don't start it until your conditional order's up, which there's no reason why you have to wait for that, but a lot of people do, it could very easily take a year and a half, 2 years to get to the end of a financial application if it's very heavily fought and you've got to go all the way to a final hearing. Thankfully, most cases don't go to final hearing, but if they do, it's a long process.
So how are the courts stacked up against women? What is, in that whole process you've just described, where do you feel, and this can apply to men, of course, but we do see it a lot more with women. Yeah. What is against them the most?
I would say the thing that is hardest for women in finances, I'm not talking about the children side here or the divorce side here, I'm talking about the finances. In the financial matters, where it's stacked against women, typically women earn less. They will typically have smaller pensions. They may have given up careers in order to have children and not had anyone funding a pension for how many years. They may never have gone back to work full time. So they have less money. Because they've got less money, typically, they're going to have less money available to go and take legal advice at the beginning. And as you will have seen time and time again, there is very little, I think, financial education out there generally for women or for men, but there's very little financial education available. So if someone comes to me and making up a scenario, it's a mum, she's got 3 children, works part-time around the kids, so very low income of her own. The dad is out working full-time, has a decent salary. He wants to hang on to his pension. He wants to hang on to everything. All the mum tends to be talking to me about when they come in is, I need to keep the house, I need to keep a roof over the kids' heads. And they're willing to disregard these pensions, which can be as valuable as the house, because it might be that the house is worth £600,000, but if it's got a £400,000 mortgage on it, and there's £200,000 equity, well, they might be giving up a £250,000 pension to keep this house, but then there's all the problems about who's going to pay the mortgage, and they haven't got the money to go and take legal advice and representation to have all this explained to them. And the trouble is, if you go in as litigant in person, the judges and the courts are not there to give you legal advice. So sometimes the judge will say, well, this isn't the right answer, you do need to go and get some advice. But often I see that not really happening. And that's where I think it's really unfair. There's not the advice available, and the waiting lists are so long, because if you've got to make an application for example, there's something called maintenance pending suit, which is, it's also called interim maintenance, where you've got a period of time while you're still married, you're not yet divorced, and you need some interim funding. You can make that application to the court, but it's absolutely fraught with risk, because you have to be able to demonstrate that you need the money, that the other side has the money. How are you going to do all that without the legal advice telling you what you need to do? So that's where I think it's stacked. It's the lack of education and lack of knowing what applications to make at what time if you haven't got the money to take legal advice to tell you what to do in the first place. So you've already got a smaller pot, and now you haven't got the advice telling you how to fix that. So I think it's double-edged.
And I can just really concur with everything that you've just said. I find that an awful lot. I see women who, with or without money, I think that's, that some clients have, quite a lot of spare cash, or they're just used to having spare cash because of their partners, but or possibly don't have a lot of spare money at all. And in the general range, like you described, they're asking, okay, well, can I have a mortgage capacity letter to prove that I can't get a big mortgage? And the conversations for me can be quite upsetting, because I can't help them. I can't magically give them, an 80 grand income or a 40 grand income to magically solve this problem. And they want to keep the house. They want to keep the kids in the same house. I'll be honest, some of them have this idolised sort of view of what it should be, and that they should be able to stay in the house, and they should have this, and they should have that. And sometimes those conversations can be quite hard. I imagine you have similar.
I do, yeah.
Where you're having to sort of say that it's just not going to work like that. And even if you start breaking the numbers down, and you look at, okay, well, if you did get some maintenance, you still won't be able to afford that level of a house. And so it's a really difficult balancing jigsaw piece. I almost feel like you're doing a £1,000 piece jigsaw while standing on one leg, balancing on an elephant who's on a ball. It's just like the most the unknown element of knowing which direction to take.
And there's so much bad information out there as well, because if you can't afford to go and get the proper legal advice about your circumstances, what are you going to do? You're going to go onto Facebook, you're going to go onto ChatGPT, you're going to go to all these different sources. And as well as the groups, I run 2 Facebook groups, one which is part of my paid membership and the other one is my free group. And I admin those groups quite strictly, as much as I'm able to. There's 5,000 people in the free group, and it's impossible for me to check every single answer anyone gives. But as far as I'm able to, me and my team try to admin it. But I go into some other groups that are not admined, or they are admined but not by lawyers. And the wrong information that is giving, it makes my teeth itch. I see people all the time saying, you're entitled to sell the house till you're 18, till the kids are 18. Like, but who's going to pay for it? Number one, where is that written in law? Can someone please show this to me? Because that's not right. And I'm hearing all these things all of the time. And I just want to say to people, go and get some legal advice. But of course, if you go into the free groups and you say that, you get 1,000 people jump on. Well, you would say that. You just want to rip everybody off for their money. And I'm like, I don't know what else I can say, because if you're taking free advice from non-lawyers, you cannot rely on it. And that's the problem. And some of the other solutions, there are some really creative solutions out there, such as some of your listeners might have heard of measure orders, which is a deferred sale. So it might be that you can't afford right now to take over the mortgage, but you can stay in the house until the children are 18, let's say. And you might agree that with your ex. But then you've got all the complications of, let's say that's 15 years away and you're 40 now. And in 15 years' time, you've then got the same problem, because now what do you do? Now you've got to rehouse when you're 15 years older and don't potentially have that much higher earnings if you've stayed at home with the kids in that way. I know it's slightly different the older they get, but it really does kick the problem into the long grass. So I think having a really clear idea of your options at the beginning is crucial. It's absolutely crucial.
There's so many rabbit holes I could go down with this conversation, and I want to make sure that we stick on point to make sure we're adding value to our listeners. And I guess let's talk about full financial disclosure for a second. So that's something that I find is a real issue. I have clients come to me and I do financial planning for them, and I ask them, okay, how much have you got? What are we playing with here? It is like baking a cake, and we've got the ingredients. And she said, well, this is all of our assets. And I'm saying, okay, but how much of that is going to be yours? And in the process, they're trying to get answers from me, because their lawyers aren't going to tell them what they need. Their lawyers are going to tell them what they can have legally. And they're saying to me, but what do I actually need? What do I need to be fighting for? And I had one client, and obviously I can't mention any names, but they had quite an expensive family home. She hadn't worked for 20 odd years. Children were grown up, but going to university kind of grown up, which is not actually grown up in this day and age, unfortunately. But they were adults. He had a very well paid job. They were in a really nice area where she had a yoga studio nearby. She also ran her own personal studio nearby. Her lifestyle was in this particular this catchment area of London. And basically, the financial situation could have been as far as sell the family home. She takes a cut. She wouldn't be able to afford to live in that area. But he wasn't providing full financial disclosure to other investments or other pensions. And so it almost makes the stress that's already in place 10 times harder, because then I'm having to play around with figures. Well, if this and if that, and if they do this, and then looking at their lifestyle and their budget and their current circumstances, I'm then saying to them, well, you need an income of $2,000 a month or $4,000 a month, whatever it might be. And we're working that into financial planning. And this particular lady, there was large amounts of investments involved, which is quite a privileged position. Not everyone's in that position, but still, the calculations for them, the lawyers are saying to her, well, you could go and get a job. Yes, you might not be able to get a £40,000 a year job, but you could go and stack shelves in Tesco's, or you could continue, run a studio somewhere. And so minimum wage, so many hours a week, you could earn maybe 22 grand a year. And I had to play these make-believe figures. This is a lady that hasn't worked for 20 years, that they're expecting to basically go into the workplace and absolutely be fine while she's going through a very traumatic life change. And whether that life change, regardless of, how privileged she might seem, that's still a lifestyle that she's used to. I have other clients who have quite a lot of mental health issues because of the relationships have been quite poor. And that's caused they're having to deal with a huge amount of stress, new information all at the same time, whilst trying to figure out what's at the end of this tunnel. Like, should I even be getting divorced? Because what's it going to look like financially? Should I carry on putting myself through this trauma because I don't know if I'll be able to feed myself? It's as literal as, or I would no longer be able to go to yoga, or I can no longer go to the gym, I won't be able to drive a car. All of these sort of lifestyle questions, but they're very important to people.
Yeah.
They make a big difference to people's lives. And I'm saying, but until we have that financial disclosure, we can't really figure out if we're baking a Victoria sponge here or a carrot cake. Two very different scenarios. And for that lady, I said to them, well, you need to go back and say you need to ask for X amount, because that's going to buy you a 1-bedroom or studio flat in the area that you want, which we were still talking about 400, 500,000. And for you to have that income for that lifestyle, and we've taken a lot out, a lot of things have been stripped out. For you to have now a lifestyle, if there's no other pensions involved and you're not inheriting pensions, but there are assets, then you would need to have 420,000 to draw an income from for you to be able to survive the rest of your life. Because women live longer.
Yep.
We're not 82, we're normally 91 as a sort of national average. Therefore, she's talking nearly £900,000 for her to be able to walk away from that marriage. But at that point in time, she had nothing to go by. So I produced this financial plan, and it was all documented. All the figures were there, and she was able to go back to the lawyers and say, "This is my break point. This is what I'm needing, and this is why I'm needing it, and this is the proof of it." But he just kept dragging his feet on the financial disclosure. She was trying to move the needle forward, because time was just ticking on from the court perspective. And I imagine you've noticed quite a lot of this in what your work's done, with work you do, sorry. What can be done in those scenarios for individuals, or where you're seeing someone not having the full financial disclosure? Is there any tips or anything you'd suggest about that process?
Yeah. And it kind of depends on who you're asking. Are you asking Elaine, the lawyer? Are you asking Ellie, the divorce without lawyers? Or me sitting here on, boots on the ground, the reality of it? Now, Elaine, the lawyer, will say there is an obligation. You must do it. And if he doesn't, I say he or she, anybody doesn't produce, the judge can force it, and they can attach penal notices and so on. That's the textbook answer. They must do it. Elaine from Divorce Without Lawyers, or Ellie from Divorce Without Lawyers, will tell you the reality is so many cases have a problem with non-disclosure. Not necessarily full non-disclosure, but there's always a bit missing. There's always something you have to chase up, or something that... And sometimes it's not that they're hiding. They just can't be bothered. They don't want to trawl through a pension that they haven't paid into for 20 years to try and find it. Although I'm pretty sure they'll do it when it comes to wanting to claim on it, they would. But anyway... There are often issues with non-disclosure that's a problem. Ellie, boots on the ground, real life experience, there are cases where I have to say to people, you're never going to get that information. So I've got somebody at the moment who's saying, I know there used to be a pension. I know there was, because every time I talked about a pension, it was, you don't need to worry about that, I've got this pension. For me, says no pension. They did a questionnaire, please confirm what happened to the pension that was in place during the marriage. She's come back and said there was never a pension. And should I absolutely know 100% there was. But she doesn't know who it was with. She's got no evidence of it. She's never going to get that information. Not without spending so much money for a pension that may have been cashed in, may never have existed because he may have been talking nonsense. We just don't know. So the reality is very depressing. And that's why the answer your lawyers will give is that, well, you can go to court and ask for stuff, but you have to have something to hang it on. So if you've got someone who is not disclosing, let's say, for example, you've got bank accounts and there are pages missing, that's easy. You can go back and say, well, look, I haven't got the months of this, this and this, I need those. If you've got something, for example, you believe a bonus or an inheritance or a lottery win or something came in during the marriage, you knew about it and you knew that came in like a year ago or 6 months ago, you can say to the person, I need a little bit extra disclosure over and above what's in the Form E. And if they say no, you can ask the judge for that. So you can go a little bit beyond what's in there. The problem comes if you don't really know. And that's another reason why I say women are often really at a disadvantage, because in so many cases, I'm glad to say less so now, the younger generation of women coming through, married women are having more control over the finances than they used to. But certainly like my grandmother's generation, she wouldn't have had a clue, but she wouldn't have paid the electricity bill. That would have been my granddad. And I'm not for 1 second implying that my grandparents were abusing each other in any way, shape or form. No. But it was the way it was done. And it's still the case that a lot of women genuinely have no idea about the other side's finances, probably don't have a lot of clue about their own.
Yeah,
they just don't know.
I find that with certain sets of, more personally than I do through work, I think, where, so Bob deals with that, and I don't get involved in any of it.
Yeah.
And, I personally, it's something that I'm obviously very passionate about, women being financially independent, but even a step back from that, is being involved in the finances and having conversations about finances in a healthy way.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, because it doesn't only have to come up in divorce. In my house, I like to think I'm pretty astute with stuff. I know what I should do and shouldn't do. I haven't got a clue how much my electricity bill is or who the supplier is. My husband deals with all of that. Not because he's controlling, but because I don't want to do it and he does it. Equally, he probably wouldn't know when my dogs are next due their groom. We've split the tasks in the house in such a way that he's got more interest in the finances than I have. If I were to become divorced, however, it would be really unfair if I said, Chris was really controlling, because that's been our choice. That's my choice largely. And I do have access to it. I just choose not to go looking. Yeah. It's joint accounts. Very often it will be that there isn't a joint account, or even the house might not be in joint names. That's the biggest problem, I think, when you don't have the visibility. Even if you choose not to be involved in it because you're not interested, having the option is really important. And if anyone's going to take anything away from this, and I'm sure you would say the same, involve yourself in the finances. Even if you don't want to be involved in the day-to-day, just make sure that you know where to find the information should you ever need it. You might never need it, and hopefully you won't, but if you do...
We have a document that we, from next year, is going to be given out as the company that obviously I regulated through Evolution Financial Planning, and it's called What You Own and Where It's Kept. And it's meant to be a document that you can save as a PDF, and you can secure it and put coding on it so it's secure, or you can print it out and write on it. And it's something that I say to clients, do that as a couple, sit together and know where your finances are. So if something was to happen to you, I've had a client who had a stroke, and the wife was ringing me going, Becky, what do I do? And she's having to he's in a coma, and she's having to get his farm and open his phone and ring the bank. And they've both got joint money and they've both got individual money, but everything was in a lot of the sort of day-to-day money was in his name. His credit cards were in his names, loans were in his names, HP for the car in his names, and it causes a lot of problems. So I think just for healthy relationships, it's important to know what you've got each other's back, right? And that includes financially.
Yeah, and it's not even about divorce, is it? It's about, like you say, somebody becoming ill or dying. How are you going to sort out your estate if you don't know where everything is? So.
Exactly. So it's not about controlling the other person, it's about understanding each other's finances as much as you'd understand what they need for their dinner. Although I don't really kick that much from my husband. He's better at it than me.
I'm very controlling in the kitchen.
Oh, are you?
Oh, yes. I don't let him, he's not allowed to use anything out of the freezer unless I've pre-approved it.
Just coming back to a second to spousal maintenance and court maintenance. Now, I've seen quite a few differences over the last 2 or 3 years in this, and that's more to do with the age of the individual. So traditionally, when I saw people getting divorced previously, I would see older women, sort of in their 50s, 60s, going for spousal maintenance. Now we've got younger women getting separating in their 40s. They are actually working. There's maybe more of an equal split in finances, and so there's less of a need for spousal maintenance. Often also we're seeing with younger children, previously you'd see from a child maintenance perspective, you would see the female getting full responsibility, therefore having a higher proportion of the income from the other spouse. And now what we're starting to see is that actually, rightly or wrongly, I'm not judging it in any way, we're seeing men taking 50-50 responsibility in the the child care, and therefore there's no requirement or need to then pay child maintenance because it's split 50-50, although I do see that sometimes happening where men aren't actually wanting to really take care of the children. I had one last week like this, and she doesn't trust him look after the children at all, but he's doing it because he wants to make sure he hasn't got to give her anything. So I'm seeing it for different reasons in different respects, but it seems to me that it's harder now to get any form of income through the courts and through the divorce process than it was maybe 5-10 years ago.
I completely agree. I had noticed, having worked in London previously, up until 2014, I worked in London. And the firm I worked at, we had very high net worth clients. So maintenance was very common. There was more than enough money to go around. And typically, if we were acting for the wife, she probably didn't work. It was very, very wealthy families. If they did work, it was often more of a kind of a hobby job than a career, if you like. Not always, of course, but in these cases where they're very, very, very wealthy spouses, then maintenance was handed out almost every case. You would almost expect it. And this is going back from when I went into family law in the kind of late 90s, mid to late 90s. Over the years, that has evolved. I did notice, even when I was working in London, there are geographical elements to it. So courts up north, maybe if I had a case in Liverpool compared to a case in London, I would expect the London spouse to get more money than the Liverpool spouse. It was just the way it was, because more of the wealth was in the London courts, richer spouses, and that's the way it went. So I noticed that at the time. I don't know if everybody would agree with that, but that was my perception of it. As time has moved on, there is now a real emphasis on everybody becoming financially independent. So whilst I wouldn't say that spousal maintenance has gone, it is certainly not something you can rely on, especially like the younger you are. It may be that there's some transitional maintenance. In many cases, you might need something on an interim basis. So let's say, for example, you get divorced, somebody hasn't worked for 10, 20 years, they might need to go in and retrain. I've really noticed a lot of clients will go into kind of more of the caring professions, but things that they couldn't maybe do when the children were little. But, I've got quite a few clients that have gone on trained as midwives or nurses and things like that, because it's something that maybe was difficult to do when the children were little. Now the children are growing. Right, I've got 2 years or 4 years or whatever it is, and maintenance might be paid for that period while they're qualifying until they hit a certain level. So that's encouraging, but it certainly can't be relied on. And I would say that most of the cases that I deal with, unless someone has actually no income and hasn't worked for a long time, they will be expected to be financially responsible. And again, a lot of women don't want the maintenance from the husbands because they say, oh, it's just another method of control. I've had cases where maintenance has been ordered, and sometimes it might only be a couple of £100 a month, literally just a tiny little top up, but the husband will pay it deliberately a day late or 2 days late, because it's not enough to go and take legal action over, but it puts them in the red for that day because the rent's come out or the mortgage has come out. So it's an element of control. So a lot of women will ask for the maintenance to be capitalised rather than having it on an ongoing basis anyway. But it's difficult. It is difficult.
And for mortgage purposes, it has to be court agreed. So it's almost like unless you don't have that seal, then the mortgage company won't take it into account. And for a lot of cases now, I'm also noticing that people want that clean slate. They don't want that ongoing relationship.
Yeah.
From a legal perspective, how does that work? Would you say proportionately, they get 10% more of equity of the house or 20% more? Like, is there a formula?
No, there's not really a formula. It's all done on need. So it would depend. You'd have to fill in your budget in your Form E to say what your needs are. And if maintenance is assessed as being required, it will be the shortfall of what is needed compared to what's coming in. You will be expected to maximise your own. So if that means applying for universal credit, if it means taking into account anything else that you might have, and I'm not saying you would be expected to bring in a lodger, but some people do. Some people say, actually, if I rent out a spare room, please don't think I'm suggesting that everyone with kids goes out renting spare rooms. That's not what I'm saying. But, I have had cases where my client said, look, if I take over the mortgage, but I rent out the spare room, I can bring this in. That means I can pay the mortgage. I don't need so much by way of a lump sum, but I don't want him coming after me for the half of the rent kind of thing. So there are creative ways of increasing the income. Some people decide to take on a second job. Very difficult if you've got children often to manage one job, let alone two. But you'll be expected to do the most you can do. But that doesn't mean that you're expected to completely change your career. If you've got a career that has meant I'm trying to think of something that doesn't pay terribly well, maybe caring or teaching assistant, for example, that has been your career. You're maximising your hours that you can do around the children. It wouldn't make any sense for a judge to say, right, you've got to now take on an extra 5 hours a week, because the extra 5 hours a week is not going to earn you enough money to offset the childcare costs, for example. So there has to be a balance. So there's no formula. It's all done on an individual basis?
So on the basis that for most women, not all, I do have clients who are main breadwinners, who their partners, taking gender out of it, are looking the roles of the household is that they do the stuff at home and they take the kids to school. But traditionally still in the UK, as we have this conversation, for a lot of women, and myself included, so I work around the children, my husband works full time, he works for a law firm, but he's not a lawyer, he's a director, and he goes to board kind of level, and so he has a lot less control. So when I had my first child, she's now 17, it made sense for me to start a business, and I've worked really, I'm not going to say I'm blessed or lucky because I've actually worked really hard to have the success I've had, but I have also had a supportive partner. I've had to, dig my heels in a few times and say, no, this is how it's going to work. But for a lot of women, they don't have that gumption or that determination. There was a period where my husband said, why are you working so hard? You don't need to work. And I'm that's how much I believe in walking the walk when it comes to, I believe in financial independence. And it would mean that if something happened to me and my partner, I know I'd be okay. I haven't got that worry of knowing, like I was describing before, what's the end of that. Yes, my lifestyle would have to change, but I know that I'd be okay. And but for a lot of women that are maybe working part-time around the children, or they haven't sort of got the most elaborate career, law and financial services, they pay quite well, whereas if you're a carer, for example, that's a very different hourly rate. Or if you're in the like crafts, or in the creative industry, again, not a massive wage. So this is a big statement, but I have it with that sort of caveat. So really, divorce, for some women, divorcing is actually not an option, and they are then what they would feel stuck in relationships.
And you do see that. I do see that. And I always say to people, you will be okay. We are fortunate. I know I might rethink that word. We are a country that, in theory at least, have a healthy benefit system that we don't like to see women and their children turfed out on the streets. With that said, okay, so that's where my caveat comes in. I wanted to say, fortunately, we do have a healthy benefit system. Unfortunately, I'm not sure it is as healthy as it used to be and should be. And it does mean that we do have situations where families do have to sell the home and there is nowhere else, and they go into rented, and in a year's time, all the equity is gone from the house because it's all been swallowed up on rent, and it's not an ideal situation. However, staying in an unhappy relationship is also not really an option for a lot of women, particularly if it's an unsafe relationship. So you are caught in between the rock and the hard place. What I will say, my belief, and I have to believe this because if I didn't, I might as well hang up my boots today. I do believe the courts will do everything they can to protect the financially weaker party as far as they're able. And that might not always be the woman, although certainly for the context of this conversation, it usually is, but they are not going to want to see a mother and children out on the street. And unfortunately, that sometimes means the mum might be staying in a house that might potentially be a little overhoused, potentially. Let's say it's a 3-bed, but it's quite an expensive 3-bed, but actually selling it, by the time you sell it, buy something else in the same area, by the time you've got your stamp duty and everything else, you're not really going to release much. The judge may say, well, look, I'm really sorry, Dad, but Mum's got to stay in the house with the kids. You're just going to have to sort yourself out. Very rare that that's going to come up where the judge has got to make that unpleasant decision. But sometimes they do. And a lot of the time I'll have the dads coming to me, the husbands coming to me saying, but where am I going to live? And there isn't an answer, because unless we can sell the house, the judge can't magic up more money. All the judge can do is divide what's there between the families. And what I personally believe, and I hope I'm right in saying this, but my belief is that the judges will always come to the right answer when it comes to that. When there literally isn't enough money for 2 houses, they will apportion what needs to be apportioned to protect the children first and foremost.
So is it still the right advice? And I've heard this for many years, is that when you are in those situations, you although you might want to leave, and we'll come on to economic abuse and controlling behaviour in just a second, where it's safe to do so, that you stay in the house. so that then the judge can then see that you need to have that house. Whereas if you go and set yourself up on your own, then they're just going to say, well, you don't need that house. Therefore, it's 50-50, off you go.
If it's safe to stay in the house, mentally as well as physically, if it's safe to stay in the house, then I would always suggest that you do so. And this is whether it's the man or the woman I'm speaking to. When you leave, it doesn't mean that you no longer have rights to that house. If you own it 50-50, you're still entitled to 50-50, even if you've left. But the problem becomes your housing need has now presumably been met wherever you've gone. Even if it's just you've moved in with your mum and dad for 6 months. If you're there, then the impetus has gone and it's kind of, whew, the judge doesn't have to throw anyone out on the streets because you're already housed. Whereas if you're both in the house, the judge has to make that decision. So it is harder. Once you're out, it is much harder for you to come back. And also the person who's in the house, without you in their space, arguably has got what they want. They've got the house. They're there on their own. That's a very glib way of putting it, because most people don't want to be living in a situation where they've got divorce rumbling on in the background for years, but they haven't got the worry that you've got of having nowhere to live.
There's no time to it.
It takes that pressure off. So
that's if the other party
really
wants
hard,
you to sell the house, of course.
Yeah.
You know, I just think through my scenario, I think my husband would move out because he's very kind, generous. He wouldn't want that sort of hanging over the children, and I think he would let me just stay in the house. Like I think I do see that sometimes where there are a lot of good, nice people out there.
Whereas I've had a case reasonably recently where the very wealthy husband with a huge income just said, right, that's it, we're going to 50-50 now on the mortgage. And the house was taken out on his massive salary, insisted he would only pay it. So he moved out, insisted the wife had to pay 50% of the mortgage, which she couldn't do. She didn't have the money to pay 50% of the mortgage. So she was forced to sell the house and take a settlement that she didn't want rather than be repossessed. And he was saying, I don't care if I'm repossessed. I mean, I don't believe that was the case, but I think it was who blinks first. And she just said to me, I don't want to fight anymore. And
I hear that a lot. I hear there's almost, before you've even got to the divorce stage, there's been possibly years. I mean, I speak to women sometimes 6-7 years before, and then eventually I hear back from them, I've been doing this a long time now, that, yeah, I've done it, or actually we worked it out. Sometimes it does go that way, which is nice to hear when that does happen. But yeah, there's a lot of issues within the relationships, not necessarily money issues, but just I find there's a real shift with women now in terms of their expectations of relationships. And I know that with me and my partner, we've grown. We've been together 25 years. That's crazy.
You don't recall.
I know. Thank you so much. But there's been lots of ups and downs in that. And so moving sort of the conversation on without sort of trying to be, it's a serious subject. But controlling and coercive behaviour is something that we've hear a lot of, and that's what might be a reason for someone to get divorced. They've tried everything they can for a number of years, but there's also economic abuse. And I've done some training on this, being that I'm a financial advisor and financial planner. There's a great charity called Surviving Economic Abuse, and for a lot of women though, they don't actually realise that they are being economically abused. How do you see that in the work that you do? Because obviously there's a couple of different, it's a legal term now. Would you like to just explain to people what that legal term, there's a difference obviously between financial abuse and economic abuse?
Well, I think for me, that it used to be that abuse was a punch in the face, a push, a shove, violence, physical. Over the years, we have all come to accept that abuse is way deeper than that. And the economic abuse side of things is really difficult because, as we say, sometimes people have set up their lives in such a way when they're happily married that what has happened during a happy marriage wouldn't be considered abuse. But as soon as you're divorced, it's now considered abuse. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And I just want to start by saying, someone saying no to you for a financial reason isn't economic abuse. That's not abuse. If you're saying, well, I want you to move out and I want to stay in the house and I want you to pay me £2,000 a month, and the other person says, no, I can't afford that, that's not economic abuse. The economic abuse is where you are being so heavily squeezed, really tightly squeezed, that your options being taken away. You can't go and get legal advice. You don't have the freedom to use your money for your own thing. It could be sometimes that they're watching everything you spend, you're having to justify. They don't even release monies to you. It might be that they cut off all the funding. If you don't have independent income, they might pay you just the bare minimum to cover the mortgage and the food, and then you've got to do everything else. Or worse still, not give you anything and just say, you'll have to go and get a job then. Go and get a job. Do it. Well, I don't know about you the last time you looked for a job, but I don't know of any jobs that you can just walk into next day. So it leaves people in a situation where they're forced to take out credit cards. They're forced to borrow money to get into debt. They might say, well, I'm paying the mortgage, or half the mortgage, as is often the way. I'm paying half the mortgage and child maintenance. That's all you're entitled to. And all of these sort of things lead to a real feeling of disempowerment, fear. It really is a huge problem, and there's no easy way out of it. But I also think we have to be very careful in not mixing up. I don't want to detract what you're about to say, but someone saying no, there is so much false allegations of abuse, and I don't want anybody to think that the ex-partner saying no is automatically abuse. It is deeper than that, and it is so damaging, and it ends lives. We've had people literally ending their lives over it.
That's crazy. Yeah, I can understand how. Yeah, it's where I see it more is where the behaviour's been there in the first place. And then it just continues through into the divorce. So it's not those scenarios where saying, I can't afford that, or no, I can't do that. To me, that's just part of the divorce process. You've had a relationship breakdown. That's part and parcel.
Yeah, splitting two pots into, one pot into two, isn't it?
It's always going to be stressful. I think for a lot of women, they don't realise that they're maybe in a relationship where they are being economically or financially abused. Yeah. And that might be where, for example, it happens over time. So you don't need to work. It's fine. I'll look after you. That sounds really innocent, doesn't it? It sounds lovely, and it is. But it goes on from there. Maybe a few years later, you have children, and you've got a car, and you can drive the kids to school. But then they say, no, we can't afford a car anymore, so you're going to have to walk to school, come rain or come shine. So they no longer have a control. They no longer know where they're going, and then they have an argument. Their phone's thrown against the wall, and their phone's broken, and they no longer can talk to their friends. They can't afford a phone contract, so they're without a car. They're without any sort of transport. So they have to get buses everywhere, but they won't give them any money. The mortgage is being paid. They've got a roof over their head. They shouldn't complain, surely not. And there's that sort of the mental abuse then starts. Well, I pay for everything. It might even goes to the point where they haven't got a coat. They can't afford to get a coat. They're cold. They haven't got the right clothes. They can't see their friends. They're isolated. So that's often. Then imagine having the strength to then say, I'm going to divorce you, when you're already in an economic and financial controlling relationship.
And they've often been told they're worthless and nobody would employ them anyway.
Yeah. And that's when you really need to get help. So anyone that's listening, that if any of that rings a bell in a negative way, there is a lot of charities and a lot of help out there, and I will put resources in the show notes. So for anybody, but obviously we've been talking a lot about women, that's one of my focuses. What would be one big sort of takeaway that you would recommend people do if they are looking to start the divorce process?
I think right from the outset, particularly if they are the financially weaker party, so whichever gender we're talking about, but the financially weaker party particularly really should get legal advice right at the beginning. That does not mean go and hire the first lawyer you come across and give them all your money. That's not what I'm saying. Even if it's just a 1 hour pay as you go, I'm not keen, if I'm honest, on free consultations, because I don't think they are tailored to you. Free consultations, quite frankly, are a bit of a sales pitch. The idea is you come in, give them a little bit, build hopefully a good rapport, which is a good thing, but then bring them on as a client. What I think is better value is go to somewhere where it's like a pay as you go, or something I do, which is called a power hour. You come in, we go through the case, you leave with a summary, a to-do list. If you want it, you can have a list of recommended advisors for different things. That sort of thing at the outset can really save you money. Now, I would say everybody who's the financially weaker party ought to start with that. But conversely, I'd also say the financially stronger party, because sometimes they'll come in and not realise what their obligations are. And it's all very well saying, well, I know I'm entitled to so-and-so, and they may be, but not knowing what the other person's entitled to could lead you to going down a path where you're in litigation arguing something that you're never going to win. So you need a lawyer who's strong enough to say no. You do not want a yes man ever. You want someone who's going to say, you've got that wrong actually. That's not going to work. That's not going to fly. Because then you know what your parameters are. So I would say the first thing to do would be to take legal advice. The next thing, think about your legal team. And when I say legal team, I said earlier, that might involve a lawyer, it might be a McKenzie friend as well, it might be a divorce coach as well. I forgot to add in, actually, financial advisor, but I think that's a really useful one, particularly if there are pensions, because I think that's very, very misunderstood. And if anyone comes and asks me for information on pensions, I go googly-eyed and go, well, I'm not advising anyone. Even if I did know, I wouldn't be allowed anyway, because I'm not a financial advisor. Choose your team and take the right advice from the right people at the same time. Don't just be an open checkbook for anybody. And I think that if you do that and you use the right professionals as you go along, you will save yourself thousands of pounds and hopefully get to a resolution sooner. I'd also say try not to see everything as a battle. There are some, I don't like the terminology of battling and fighting in court and I won in court. Nobody wins. If you end up in a final hearing, you're not going to win. You may come out with the better result than the other party, but you'll have probably lost 18 months, 2 years of your life, and you'll probably do quite a lot of damage to your relationship with the ex. And if you're going to be co-parenting children going forward, that can be difficult. Sometimes there's no choice. Sometimes you have to go to court, so don't be frightened of it. But I would definitely say know the parameters of your case and try to do as much as you can amicably where possible. But don't sell yourself short. Don't just find yourself giving in, because if you have been in a controlling relationship, that might be your natural default is to give in to them. Taking advice at the outset will at least let you know where you should be standing firm and where you could potentially, give a bit here and take a bit there.
And we have Liz Harrington coming into the studio soon to do talk about more from a trauma-informed perspective of divorcing, and to those people that have gone through quite a traumatic divorce or been in quite a sort of controlling relationship, I think it's really important that they have a coach of some description on board to help them emotionally through that, to sort of strengthen themselves in that decision making. There's some big decisions that need making in that process. What just quickly, just ending shifting to sort of end the sort of our time together today. Is there any particular questions that you would say when you're speaking to these different lawyers? Because I speak to some clients and I think, oh wow, they've had a really good lawyer, and then I speak to others and I say, well, what about the children? Or did they say anything about the house? Did they say anything about the pensions? Have they said what you might be entitled to? Have they given you any, when we're trying to work out how much of that cake we're going to... No, nothing. There's been nothing mentioned. Is there any sort of... You mentioned one thing, like actually pay for a power hour, but when you're just initially going to find the right one for you, a bit like when you work with a financial advisor, it's well, sometimes with what we do, I do one-off pieces of advice, but often it's ongoing relationship for years and years and years. So what can the person be asking that lawyer to work out if they're the right person for them?
I would say the first thing is go on personal recommendation. That's the first thing, because if you know a few people or one person who's had a really good relationship with their lawyer, that's the best starting point, rather than, whatever the modern day equivalent of the yellow pages would be. Far better to go on a personal recommendation. Then a lot of lawyers, as I say, they will give a free half-hour consultation. And that's fine, but don't expect to get much legal advice from it. That's more, in my opinion, and I know there will be lots and lots of lawyers shaking their heads at this, going, no, that's not what I do. But in my experience, the majority of them, it is about trying to get that client on board for something more meaningful. Because personally, I couldn't advise you on your divorce, your finance, your children, find out about you and give you meaningful advice in 30 minutes. You're not going to get anything meaningful. You're going to get such a whistle-stop overview as to what the law is, and that's it. So I'm not going to be able to do that. But if you do feel that you want to speak to somebody personally, have a free consultation with them if they offer it, but treat it as personality rather than legal advice. You might then have to pay for a proper session afterwards anyway.
Yeah.
In other things that you can ask, I think really just asking them, how do they work? Are they willing to work with you to keep your costs down? Are they willing to do pay as you go? So even my clients that do pay as you go, I had one lady, this is going back a few years now, she used to book a session every Friday. So I had an ongoing relationship, but I didn't have to be the one receiving the angry communications from her ex. So it kept the costs down. She just came to me with the information that she wanted me to do. She booked it in my diary for every Friday, but on a Monday, if she didn't feel she needed it that week, she'd cancel it. So you can still have that ongoing relationship. So work out what you want from the lawyer, and is the lawyer willing to do that? Because ultimately, you are a team. Although, you're paying the lawyer for their advice, they need to also work with you to make sure you get. Some of my clients need absolute full-on hand-holding. Others really don't want to hear from me unless there's something meaningful for me to tell them. So work that out, what you want.
So it's really working out like who you want to work with and what your personal needs are, being realistic about that. And if you feel that you need more hands-on, then you're just going to have to obviously pay more for it.
Exactly. And also don't take too much store on the hourly rate. The hourly rate is not the important part here, because if you've got someone who charges £350 an hour but can do a piece of work in an hour because they're experienced, but you've got someone else who's charging £200 an hour but they're going to take 2 hours to do it, the £350 cheaper. So the hourly rate that's the headline that everyone goes, oh, I'm not paying £350 an hour. But that's not the key. Ask them, what did it cost you? Your last Form H that you filled in, which is a cost form you have to do when you go to court. What was your last Form H when you went to a final hearing? What was your last Form H when you went to an FDR? Those kind of things will give you a better indication as to the overall costs rather than someone's hourly rate.
Brilliant tip. That's fantastic. Anything you'd like to mention to the listeners before we wrap up today?
I think I would say have confidence in yourself. Especially if you've been in a controlling relationship, you may feel that you don't have the confidence, the skills, the knowledge. You don't need to be a lawyer to do this for yourself. You just need to have a little bit of belief in yourself, and you might have to borrow that from somebody until you really develop it for yourself. But there's lots of help out there, and our Divorce Without Lawyers community is really strong. They all support each other, and that's the sort of thing you want. Build a little team around you to make sure that you've got all the right people at all the right charging rates, so that you're not overpaying for some things and underpaying for others.
Well, I certainly do recommend your membership to people that I come across, because I feel like it's a safe place for me to send people that you're not going to be pitched to every 5 minutes, and you're actually going to have a community of people that are going through a similar thing or been through a similar thing. So we're going to be putting contact details of how to get in touch with you in, again, the show notes. But do you have a website, direct website that people can go to? I
do indeed. So we have www.divorcewithoutlawyers.co.uk. And if you want me for one-to-one work, then that's www.mcintyrelaw.co.uk.
Perfect. Well, it's been lovely having you today, Ellie, and I'm sure you'll be back at some time soon.
I'm sure I will. Thanks for having me,
so
Becky.
much. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Thank you for joining us today at Accelerating Your Wealth with your host, myself, Rebecca Robertson. I hope you enjoyed the show. Do subscribe and let us know in the comments any of your thoughts.